I'm holding up a book here, and this is really a fun book. This is a gentleman whom I met through a mutual acquaintance last week by the name of Roy Berger, who has spent a large part of his life, Roy is in his 50s, going to Major League Baseball fantasy camps. And this is really something I think that happened about 20 years ago for the first time. You get to go down south and play baseball with other campers and with the legends of your favorite teams. Roy had spent a number of times going to fantasy camps with, among other clubs, the Pirates, the Yankees, and the Detroit Tigers, and has had great experiences and has recorded them. This is a marvelous book, and I really suggest that you read it. You can't really put it down. It's really something for anyone who's wanted to spend some time actually playing with the legends. And we have Roy with us, and Roy, it's such a pleasure to have you, and thanks for taking time in your busy schedule. I understand you're at an airport, and you've made this time for us, and we're ever so grateful. What got you started doing this, as far as putting the book together?
Tony, like every kid growing up in the 1950s and 1960s, I wanted to be a big league ball player. And then the reality hit when I was 17 years old, and my high school baseball coach cut me from the team, and I just didn't have the talent or ability to do it. And frankly, I forgot about it. And some years later, I found out that about 60% of the major league teams hold a fantasy camp, where you can actually realize that dream once again as an adult, and mostly as an over-the-hill adult. And back in the early 90s, I was with a gentleman who just got back from Los Angeles Dodgers fantasy camp, and he showed me his uniform and told me about his experience. He was down at Dodger Town in Vero Beach, and I said to my wife, one day I think I'd like to do that. Well, I forgot about it for about 15 more years, raising the family, professional career, and whatnot. And back in 2009, I met a guy at a cocktail party who had just gotten back from Cleveland Indians fantasy camp. And he told me all about it once again. I went home to my wife and I said, I think that's something I want to do. And she said, that's not something I want you to do. That's something I insist you do. So in 2010, I found the 50th anniversary of the 1960 World Champion Pirates. They were holding a fantasy camp. That was my earliest baseball memory. I was a fanatical Pittsburgh Pirates fan growing up on Long Island. And, the guys that I worship, Bill Mazeroski, Bill Berger, Vernon Law, Bob Flynn, Bob Skinner, these guys were actually living in camp. So I enrolled, and I got to basically see my major league dream come true. Not at age 17, not at age 21, but at age 57. And I said I was going to do it once and once only, and I just finished my sixth camp.
It's an amazing thing. Now, I can only imagine if you were to take a demographic of baseball fantasy campers, they probably and I'm a little bit younger than you are, but we're pretty close in age. But I would imagine these are gentlemen, perhaps maybe several ladies you might find along the way.
Yeah, the average age of basically fantasy camper is in the mid-50s, about 54 or 55 years old, and that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, these things are not cheap. A week with the Yankees is $5,000, a week with the Pirates is $4,000.
Sure.
So once you get to the mid-50s, you've got a little bit of disposable income. Hopefully your professional career is on the back nine, that you can afford to take time away. Your family's up and grown and out of the house. So you'll find your average camper to be in the mid-50s. Now, having said that, you'll have some guys 32 or 35 years old that you either learn to hate or you want them on your team. And at Pirate Camp last January, we had a guy, 81 years old. He caught every inning for 7 games, and then 2 weeks later had open heart surgery. So the stories are just incredible, and everybody's doing one thing. Everybody is just realizing their dream. We're making the dream come true. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful week, and you get to spend it with the ex-big leaguers. And, if you're a baseball fan in the 50s and 60s, if you're a baseball fan in the 70s or 80s, and you can find the time and you can find the spot to do it, it's wonderful. And if you can't, then by all means, you need to read The Most Wonderful Week of the Year, where I tried to basically tell the story of fantasy camps in 4 years.
Well, and I can only imagine, like, when you come in from playing the game or the practice session or whatever, there's probably a lot of aching joints and creaky muscles and, making a line for the whirlpool. And I guess, are there a lot of pulled muscles and injuries and, shall we...
The things to go are the hamstrings and the quads. And, there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one is you're using muscles you've not used for 30 or 40 years, and no matter how much you want to try to prepare, you take fate into your hands a little bit when it comes to the injuries. The other thing is you get guys 60 years old that are going 100 miles an hour the very first day and probably only should be going 30 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So, injuries stack up from the very first day. You normally start with a team of 12, and by the third or fourth days, you got 9 guys that can still play. You're doing well. And the story that I like to tell, which is a very, very true story, is on the first day of camp, the line for the breakfast buffet goes out the door. On the second day of camp, you can walk up and get whatever you want to eat because the line for the training room goes out. And everybody's got bumps and bruises and, hamstrings and quads and shoulders and arms and just about everything you can imagine. Now, the great part about fantasy camp is not only are you playing at the spring training venues of the teams, and not only do you have the ex-big leaguers as your coaches, but you have today's professional training staff at your disposal. So the same type of treatment that Derek Jeter would get on a regular basis, or Verlander, or any of these guys, is available to you a week of fantasy camp. And if you don't want to play ball, and you just want a week of spot treatments, I can't think of a better spot.
It's a fascinating thing, and you often wonder what goes on in a baseball clubhouse, which is always sort of an inner sanctum. Now you and I were fortunate, growing up in the greater New York metropolitan area, where the really great sports writers, the Maury Allens, the Phil Peppes, the Dick Youngs, would really kind of give you that good look of what it's like to be, in the Met clubhouse with Gil, or in the Yankee clubhouse with Ralph Houck, but yet I've never been in a clubhouse, and you have. And the thing is, are there little nuancy things that you pick up with the players, with the trainers, with the personalities that, as Joe Garagiola used to say, these are the things that don't show up in the box score, so to speak?
Well, the first thing is when you walk into the Yankee clubhouse at Steinbrenner Field, for example, for the very first time, and there is your pinstripe uniform with your name on the locker. I mean, if that doesn't stop you in your tracks at 60 years old, I don't know what will. But I truly think the flavor of the fantasy king clubhouse is exactly the same as the flavor of the Major League clubhouse. There's an incredible amount of camaraderie. We are basically living for the game. We are living for baseball. I'm not sure the Major Leaguers, basically, some of these guys don't treat it as a job. We certainly treat fantasy camp as a privilege.
Right.
And then, of course, you've got your kangaroo court, but basically you get fined for indiscretions the day before, everything from wearing the wrong colored uniform to having your belt buckle not buckled to the wrong shoes, to mistakes you make out on the field. And, a true flavor of fantasy camp for the Yankees, if you can imagine the fantasy camp judges, Mickey Rivers. The problem Mickey had with basically the assignment. And, Mickey's the judge, and he's probably funnier when he goes to levy fines than some of the stuff that he's fining guys for. He had a great line one year while he was playing for the Yankees. He said his goal for the season was to hit 300 and remain injury-prone.
It makes me think back to those baseball is a funny game segments back in the, I guess, the early 1970s, where Joe Garagiola would cover the kangaroo court for the Baltimore Orioles, and Frank Robinson, the great Frank Robinson, sitting there with a powdered wig and a coat, and with this oversized mallet, and he's fining Boog Powell for not bringing enough lobsters for the team. It was hysterical, but I can only imagine.
Tony, you are good, and actually Mickey does show up with a judge's robe every day, and he just, he basically he'll fine you $5 or $10 or $20 for a real big indiscretion. And the great part about the fine is everybody pays them, and they all go to the respective team's charities. Former Pirate pitcher Steve Blass, the Pirates
I was reading.
Kangaroo Court judge, very, very, very funny guy. And, you don't mind being singled out, you don't mind paying the fine, but when all's said and done, the fine goes for a good cause, it goes to kids' charity. It's just part of the experience, and it's just part of the total major league experience. And then you look up and, you're being coached by guys like Frank Canana, and, at the camp just passed, I had Oscar Gamble and Fritz Peterson. Can you imagine Fritz is back around after what he went through? And, you just get to see all these guys and reminisce. And, they love telling stories as much as you love listening to stories because they're out of limelight. And they get an opportunity to sit down and basically talk to you about what it was like to be a ball player back in the 60s or 70s, and some of the stuff they went through, and guys they played with, and guys they didn't like, and, being a teammate of Mickey Mantle. My goodness, that stuff was just mesmerizing.
And Peterson was a darn good pitcher. Of course, we remember him for the whole, wife swapping thing, but he's a darn good Yankee pitcher who's really kind of lost to history in that regard. I've always felt.
Yeah, he was a good pitcher. Unfortunately, he was with the Yankees during what turned out to be the very, very low days. And he actually wound up, I think, going to Cleveland or Minnesota. But you will not find a nicer guy who's very, very open about the situation that he and Mike Kekich went through.
Yeah, I had heard him speak, and it was just really and you think of this, whatever you want to call it, hyper-conservative Yankee organization, and I believe, was Bill Verdon the manager then, if I recall correctly?
Well, I don't know if Verdon managed that club, but you bring up a very good point about Bill Verdon. He is a great, great Yankee trivia question. He's the only guy that managed the Yankees for 2 years and never managed a game in Yankee Stadium.
That's correct. Yeah, and a darn good player, and what you were saying, just a very nice gentleman to be with.
Well, Bill Verdon was my first manager in 2010 when I went to Pirates camp. And, Bill Berger was certainly one of my 1960 heroes, and he was a key, especially defensively, in the win in 1960 over the Yankees. And, having Bill Berger put your name into a lineup card when you're 57 years old, that just gives you the shakes.
It really does. Yeah, I can only imagine. And, one of the things that really gripped me in the book now, I would watch a lot of baseball on television. When baseball on television was free to watch, we all remember that. The 162 games a year, and the Yanks and the Mets were televising 150 free games a year, but we won't talk about that. That's a sore spot with me to this day, but I would see Bill Lee pitch for, he came in from Montreal, and Ralph Kiner would always say, well, that's so slow, you could time it with an hourglass. And I'm watching this, Roy, and I'm watching Frank Tanana, and later you're saying, boy, I could hit that. But you actually stood up against some of these guys, and what did you think? I mean, was facing a Tanana fastball, did it look like it was on TV? You could hit it with a door? I mean,
Well, the first major league pitcher I ever faced in 2010 was a guy by the name of Zane Smith, that actually won 100 games. As a matter of fact, he played for the Red Sox for a while, and he threw the ball probably in the low 70s, and the first pitch I ever saw from him was as fast as anything I've ever seen. And then I faced El Duque and Frank Tanana and Jeff Nelson and Bob Walker, and these guys could bring the ball. But my first at bat against El Duque was basically in the fantasy game we played, and he probably threw the ball in the mid-80s. Now, no one knows how old El Duque is.
You never really told us.
He could be 60, he could be 35. But he threw the ball in the mid-80s, and it's the fastest thing I've ever seen. And the funny thing about this, Tony, is when I got up there, I was not scared, I was not intimidated. I found myself probably concentrating more during that at-bat than I did at any of the other 20 or 22 at-bats during the week against campus. So he throws the ball in the 80s, it goes right by me. It was a called strike, and I said, hey, I stepped back. I said, do me a favor, slow it down. Well, the next pitch he threw was probably a 35-mile-an-hour curveball that started in Orlando and actually wound up in Tampa. I had never seen anything like it in my life. And fortunately, he missed the strike zone, because if I swing at that, I've got to be the most foolish guy, and I'm making those highlights. I'll tell you that if I swing and miss it. And the next time he threw something in the 60s, and I got some wood on it, and I actually grounded out to Homer Bush at short. It was a bang-bang play. They only got me by about 15 steps at first. But it was fun, and it's fun getting up against the major leaguers, and I actually got a hit against Jeff Nelson, and I got a hit against Frank Tanana, and I got a hit against a guy named Gil Patterson. And no matter what it costs you for the week to do this, that's the stuff you take away, and that's the stuff that you don't expect at this point of life, of saying, I got a base hit against Jeff Nelson, or I got to bat against El Duque, or I got to bat against Frank Tanana. I mean, that stuff is priceless, and that's what the fantasy experience is all about.
Well, and when I think of Tanana, now here's a guy, who really is a young pitcher. I mean, coming up with California, he threw BBs, and then he hurt his arm and had some personal issues and recovered himself, and spent years and years and years and years, at least, and this is a fellow I'd really like to make his acquaintance, at least watching on TV and just getting by with his head and spotting the ball and just placement and ground ball pitching. And I say to everybody, this current thing now with CC Sabathia, and everybody who's sort of in, our baseball fraternity, so to speak, I always tell them, he will not be Frank Tanana, he will not be Jerry Koosman, because he didn't learn how to pitch. And I think the thing, Tanana to me is a testimony to that. Jack Billingham to me was a testimony to that. Jerry Koosman, they learned how to pitch. Milt Wilcox. That's a guy I can imagine you can just talk pitching about for days and days and days, and he's forgotten more than any of us will remember.
I was fortunate enough to basically play for Frank Tanana in 2011 with the Tigers. And you talk about a gentleman. I mean, he is just an absolute first-class gentleman. He's devoting his life right now to the church outside of Detroit. The old story about Frank Tanana was in the 70s, he threw 90 miles an hour, and in the 90s, he threw 70 miles an hour.
Right.
And he boasted about the fact that he gave up the most home runs in American League history as a pitcher. He's also the only guy to give up home runs to both Aaron and Bonds. And just an absolute gentleman, just the nicest guy, and all he wanted to do was make you happy for that week. I mean, Frank Tanana is a class act. And yeah, I mean, when he threw that left-handed slider back in the day in the 70s and 80s, he was awful tough.
Yeah, he really was something. And just the thought of being there with these players. Now, I can imagine you're with this, I'm going to use a term as a very good rabbi friend and client uses with me all the time when he describes the tax code to me, myriad. You're with a myriad of campers of, probably all walks of life. And I can only imagine there must be some incredibly touching stories that you've run into of people you have met.
Well, I mean, you do. I mean, you've got basically from a camper standpoint, we just finished pirate camp with basically a preacher who had an incredible fight with cancer. And his goal was obviously not only to survive, but to come back and then play as pirate as he can. And then there's the guy that obviously goes in for open heart surgery. And then there are the guys that basically can't afford to do this, but their wife or their kids are giving it to them for a 60th birthday present or, a 35th or 40th wedding present. And just, the treasure of the time that you spend out there with each other and with the ex-ball players. And, and then you always get the guy, the jerk, that's basically a sliding headfirst into second base. He's got all the bling on and that type of stuff. Well, it takes about 2 days before he realizes he really doesn't have a place. That's not what this thing is about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this thing is about camaraderie. This thing is about being a baseball fan. This thing is about enjoying the back nine of life. Because, obviously, none of us know what's ahead for us tomorrow.
No.
But most of us at fantasy camp know that we're probably on the 14th or 15th tee of life in our career, and we're making the best of it. It is heartwarming, and even if you hear the stories of some of the ex-pros that are there, and not only how they got to Major League Baseball, but some of the stuff that's happened to them afterwards. It's great. It's a wonderful week, and hopefully, in the most wonderful week of the year, I was able to capture that.
And do you have plans for attending any future camps as you go forward, and perhaps a sequel to your book?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, next week, as a bonus of being at Pirates camp, we get to play a reunion game at TNC Park. So I will actually be playing at the home of the Pirates next Saturday morning. We get 1 hour on the field, and, I was also asked to manage our team, which is probably, I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse. 1 hour. But yeah, I get to go to Pittsburgh next week. I get to play at GNC Park, where Andrew McCutcheon and everybody's playing right now. And then, God willing, in a perfect world, I'm going to go back to the Yankees in November, and I'm certainly going to go back to the Pirates next January. I'm lucky because from a physical standpoint, I can do it. I train about a month beforehand. I work on the quads. I work on the hamstring. I can't run worth a darn. And scoring on sacrifice fly has become a lifetime ambition for me. Something down the line. You know what? It's something that I love. It's something that I look forward to. From a career standpoint, life is very, very good. Yeah, I plan to do it as long as I physically can do it.
And it's really something because I think there's a lot of fans today, and you really kind of touch a chord, Roy, who who follow their team and want to see the team win. But do they really love the game? Do they really love the nuances, the players, the character, and I think you've really captured that. And honestly, truthfully, I don't see that in a lot of younger people. I'm insulting my very fine producer here, but
I totally agree with you. I think the way we watch baseball and really what baseball has become is so changed from the adulation that we had back in the 60s and 70s and the way we watched the game. And, I'm not sure all this HD stuff and everything else is really good for the nuances of the game, but I totally agree with you. I think we're a different type of baseball fan than the kid that's growing up today. And, certainly I think we can appreciate much more the heroes that we had from 1960 that were doing this for $20,000 a year and then having to go out and work a job during the winter to basically feed their families. It's a different game. It's a different era. And all of us that go to fantasy camp, and let me tell you, if anybody that's listening right now has any desire to do this at all, go to the respective team's website on MLB, and under fans, there'll be something that'll say fantasy camp, and take a look at it. And trust me, it'll be the most wonderful. Well, it is the most wonderful week of the year. I mean, it's the most wonderful week you can spend.
It's fascinating, and in our waning moments together, I remember Joe Torre. I think his first world title, he came before the crowd at Central Park, and he held up the Yankee uniform, and he said, I've been a Brave, I've been a Cardinal, I've been a Met, but there's something about these pinstripes. And is going to all the camps, and if you were a player, is there some intangible, whatever you want to call it, dimension with being a member of the Yankees as opposed to any of the other big league clubs if you had to put yourself in that position?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably the reverse of that is true, is considering that I was such an impressionable and fanatic Pittsburgh Pirate fan in the 60s. I think when I walked into the clubhouse at Pirate City for the first time in 2010 and saw my uniform with my name hanging from my locker, that stopped me in my tracks. I mean, it really did. That was the realization of a dream come true. And obviously, if you go into the Yankee clubhouse on the first day of fantasy camp and you see these guys that were fanatical Yankee fans and still are today, and they just go up and they stare at their uniform hanging up there with the pinstripes, and they're posing for pictures and taking selfies in front of it and whatnot. And Steinbrenner Field in the clubhouse, they've got the frieze of the old Yankee Stadium that runs around the top of the clubhouse. I mean, that first look, that first moment is something that's very, very precious. It's something that you never thought would happen. It's something you could happen by writing a check, and that's what's happened to this. I mean, the dream comes true. It's just never, ever too late to realize that Major League Baseball dream, and it's a fantasy, but who cares? You get to be a Major League ball player for a week.
And I'll tell you, just in this brief segment, for those that are watching live today and those that will watch later on our YouTube channel, you have given everybody a lot of excitement and a lot of hope, and perhaps rekindled some dreams for when we were back there watching or listening or whatever we were doing to follow baseball. The book, again, I'll hold it up, The Most Wonderful Week of the Year, Roy Berger. And Roy, it's been a total pleasure. Whatever you do for the rest of this day, have a terrific day, and do keep us posted on your activities. We will we'll mention it.
Sorry, real quick before we go, it's The Most Wonderful Week of the Year. It's mostwonderfulweek.com, or it's on Amazon as The Most Wonderful Week of the Year in both ebook and basically soft cover as well. You have been absolutely terrific, and it's a pleasure to talk with a baseball guy like you. This is a lot of fun.
I'll tell you, a lot of things get in my head, but it really did establish a fabric way back when, and it's just a great segment when you can talk to someone of like mind of what it was when we were following these teams so long ago. Take care, Roy. Best to your family, and we're going to get to you. We have a Monday night show.
Wonderful week of the year. Thanks, Tony.
Take care. Bye now. We'll also have Roy on our sports show in Willimantic, Bob Lazari and I, and just a fascinating time, and reading his book will bring a tear to your eye. That was Roy Berger, and we will be joined very soon in our 11 o'clock segment by the great Marty Appel. Marty's just a treasure. Believe me, if you like peanut butter with Roy, you'll love Skippy with Marty. He's got some incredible Yankee tales to tell and incredible baseball tales. So with that, we're heading up to our 11 o'clock hour, getting to the second base bag, starting to round third. Tony DeAngelo here in Connecticut Morning, May 13, 2014. Right back after this.